So this is my reading and commentary of the Proverbs. I've come to chapter 28. We are on 28 out of 31 chapters. And it has been a long road. But yet the road continues. Starting with verse 1. The wicked flee when no man pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion. So like in usual style, let's begin with the first half of the verse. The wicked flee when no man pursues. Now I say this sort of thing often, usually at the beginning of one of these episodes, that every one of these proverbs should be seen as a potential key to open a door of the mind through which we can explore, we can come to know, we can come to be. We can make ourselves better through this process of reflection. And however simple something may be, the concepts behind what we are talking about are universal, shared experience among all people. What the wicked is will always be something that is known to man. For as he may identify it in others, he can identify it in himself, however large or however small. The wicked flee when no man pursues. So although an exercise not foreign to my commentary on the Proverbs, it seems always necessary to do it, to think about what the word wicked means. Think about where it came from, and think about the truth of that term. And I think, as I mentioned, the wicked is something that, although we may at one time or another find ourselves in deep water forgetting the intricate details of what the wicked person is, perhaps sometimes it's good to lose some of the more bureaucratic connections that can come with time, age of institutions, and look at it with new eyes. To reimagine it, to rediscover it, to re-enchant it. To make it practical, readily understandable to our experience, as it ought to be. So from this word wicked, we have the idea of a sorcerer. So looking at the etymological origins here, I'm looking at that Old English Wicca, referring to, again, the sorcerer or the witch. Now, many exercises I've gone from the term wicked to Wicca to witch, and then followed that trajectory. But I want to depart and take the word sorcerer and explore the etymological roots there. But before I do so, I want to mention some of the ways in which the definition of the word wicked has changed over time. Now, in the first sense, the source here indicates that the terms linked to Wicca, witchcraft, are practices associated with malevolent or supernatural powers. Now, of this, I think there can be a treatment and a discussion itself, both negating certain things about what malevolence and what supernatural powers would afford us, or afford the modern mind, let's say. And I don't say that out of arrogance, I say that out of a desire for practicality, and in the view that context matters, and that to rediscover something and reapply it is not an easy matter, but it can be expedited if we understand that the human being is a changing creature and yet has aspects of himself that remain the same. And both looking back and looking forward, it's impossible to tell exactly how a word will end up or how appropriate the conceptualization of it was then. So malevolent or supernatural powers. The easier one for me to consider and to think about is malevolent. A malevolent power. Supernatural takes me a lot of work to get up to the point where I find the inroad. That's not to say that I don't believe in an inroad. Inroads are very difficult to come by. And without the more base exploration, I think it's almost fruitless to go there directly. And so we see this term malevolent. Okay, what does that mean? It means having or showing a wish to do evil to others. Now, this original meaning, and perhaps tied to something that is supernatural, would depend on how the people at this time viewed what was natural. So again, I don't want to get caught up in that rabbit trail because it'll take me all over the place. But it suffices to say, I think for now, that we have a strong foundation for this word, rooted in this desire, this potential desire of a person to do evil upon somebody else. And to practice witchcraft would be to practice that art of doing evil upon somebody else. It's quite easy to think of a cauldron and pouring some spices in there, or to design a voodoo doll and throw needles into it. And this be our sort of popular conception of what practicing witchcraft is. In my mind, I think of practicing witchcraft as something more symbolically. Surely it can be weaving together an identity. You can see this in a physical manifestation. Maybe the art reflects, the physical art reflects the broader mental game that is played by the witch. Again, in the sense that what is being weaved, if it's, let's say, if we're thinking physically, a physical representation of the art, we think of a sewed individual or maybe a series of individuals. And if it's sewed by the witch, I think the witch understands intimately the fiber, the innermost components, the constitution of the people that she is dealing with. And again, I'm reverting here to the witch instead of the sorcerer. But since we're talking about witchcraft, we could just as easily talk about sorcerer craft, but sorcerer may have a different road to lead us down. So sticking here for a moment with witchcraft. And this interweaving of not only understanding but also will on the part of the person that is performing this witchcraft, that within the very fibers and constitution of a person as he or she finds them, the insidious part is to plant a seed of evil that tempts the heart towards negativity and ultimately absence of being for their sake, for the sake of the wicked person. So by the Middle English period, the 12th to 15th centuries, the term wicked solidified into its modern spelling and was used to mean evil, immoral, or sinful. And so it's striking to me that the meaning, perhaps it changed to a degree, but I think what we've lost, and I don't know when it occurred, but I think of it now as I think about the difference between Old English and Middle English. What we've lost, perhaps rightly so, is some of the aspects of the belief of one's ability to perform certain things under the guise of being a sorcerer or of being a witch. But by the same token, I think we have lost not only elements of the Middle English sense, where it's purely thought of as a term that is associated with evil, immoral, and sinful, which of course the Old English sort of is, but also of the profession of the witch or of the sorcerer, of the type of being, the type of person that would commit themselves to such an awful art. And by extension of that, as a matter of the security of the individual identity, how to fight against it, how to prevent against it. In order to do that, one has to understand what it means to be wicked, what it means to have these qualities of being evil, of sowing deceit, of producing these symbolic things, but actually has actual practical effects in the world because of not just their symbolic weaving, but their physical interactions with people and placing themselves in a strategic position in the broader chessboard that is their view of the world to enact evil, wicked purposes. And I do make a distinction between wicked and evil, but evil flows through the wicked. Where the wicked might not at their core be evil, but mostly self-serving, which can satisfy evil ends. Now, in terms of the Proto-Germanic or Proto-Indo-European roots, we have the possibility to trace the word wicked to the Proto-Germanic root wicken, meaning to bend, yield, or to give way. And what exactly is being bent, yielded to, what is giving way? I think is in some sense, what is giving way is the good. And what is bent is morally negative, morally consequential. Bent in the sense that there is a deviation from that which is good, moving away from. Now, moving into the term sorcerer, following these etymological roots, starting from Latin, we have sortiarius, meaning one who tells fortunes or casts lots. The term SORS, or sortus, the prefix of that word, means a lot, fate, destiny, or share. In ancient Rome, casting lots was a practice used to divine the will of the gods or determine fate. So this was a person that manipulated lots or fate. And this gave him a certain amount of authority. It's claimed here that this was often regarded as supernatural. Regardless of how I feel about that word, I think that, again, there's an interesting reflection to be had about the nature of this person. We could think about a person that is quite discerning, prudent perhaps, in their analysis of the overarching facts, of the context of a particular situation, of a person's life. And it's not without reason to suggest that a person can come to a fairly strong conclusion about where a person of interest will end up, where their fate rests, so to speak. And there's any number of degradations from that. You can have quite a poor and misleading fortune teller. Doesn't base their analysis on much of anything at all. So, keeping this in mind as we move forward. In the Old French, we have the word sorcière, which means sorcerer or wizard. So this included magical practices, casting of spells. The term magic in and of itself is an interesting one. Again, there's two roads I think that we can go down there. Middle English, 12th through 15th centuries, we have the same as the sorcerer retaining its association with magic and fortune-telling, use of supernatural powers. Now, the word magic itself comes from the old Persian class of men that were called the magus or magi. They were considered wise men, practitioners of mysterious arts. They studied astrology, rituals of divination. In ancient Greek, the word magic, or the root of what we now have as the word magic, was magos. Again, referring to somebody of that Persian priestly caste, or practicing sorcery or engaging in supernatural rituals. So there is this interweaving in terms. There is this relatedness of the word magic to, again, sorcery and witchcraft and all this sort of thing. But what I'm trying to separate out here is the primary arbitrary distinction of, or maybe just I should say, the arbitrary nature of somebody that would practice a supernatural ritual and would act based on something that probably doesn't have any standing in the material world or how their life will play out. Perhaps there is some broader symbolic meaning that can be interpreted from a series of ritualistic events. Maybe a proverb can be come to, and this can simulate some thought and provide one interesting insights. But again, I really wish to get away from something that is not purposeful and it's not useful. But all the same, I don't want to deny that aspect of the wicked that undeniably has within it the elements of evil. And within the elements of evil, I think we have the aspect of confusion. Along with confusion, this inability to sort information properly. This is what I've associated strongly with the fool. But the fool and the wicked and the evil person, they all share this relationship. The wicked flee when no man pursues. Kind of an interesting expression. Why would the wicked flee? Usually you'd think of somebody fleeing if somebody else was pursuing. And if we could think about pursuit, if we could think about the chase, we could think about the desire of capture, the wicked person probably would want this type of attention. This is what they thrive on. They thrive on the attention so they can pervert the mind, so they can practice the witchcraft to pervert it. This is how they draw people in. But the irony is that they flee from the very absence that they wish to impart on their unfortunate subjects. The wicked flee when no man pursues, but the righteous are bold as a lion, so they are steadfast, they stand firm. But in the broader imagistic landscape, how exactly does this hold up for us in our lives? Outside of encountering a situation, or let's just go with this. Let's say we encounter a situation that produces some considerable anxiety. It's a novel situation. We don't know what to do. The wicked person, being bent on manipulation and exacting attention from others for their purposes. The wicked person would crumble. The wicked person, if they could not sink their teeth into anything that would make the information that they possess or that they wish to use to deceive, if this sort of thing does not work, then there is nothing there that will shield them, that will hide them from the truth, that they are wicked, that they don't know, perhaps they don't know what they're doing, or their purposes, more importantly, are exposed, the wicked purposes. And I was thinking in my mind, tomorrow likely I'll encounter some of these situations where maybe there will be anxiety or an adverse feeling associated with a novel situation, because there's always novel situations at work. How exactly do I approach these novel situations? Do I have this image in my mind, a rather cartoonish image that I am to be like this lion that is standing there? I don't think I have a very intimate relationship with the lion. I have not observed them outside of nature documentaries and things. But the point, the symbol, the pride of the lion, the strength, the drive, the determination, the king of the plains. And within the word bold, of a person showing an ability to take risks, somebody that is confident, somebody that is courageous, strong. This doesn't necessarily describe what it takes to be this thing, but just thinking about the situation, again, from my own experience, that is likely to occur. What makes one strong, I think, in a moment, is recognizing if they don't know something, that their primary goal, their chief objective, is to find out an answer. And we do it to our best ability because we want an outcome that is good. We are after rectification. We want to see something built and solved rather than destroyed and confused. And based on those principles, we have to stand firm. We have to stand boldly and strongly, as the lion does. For the transgression of a land, many are the princes thereof, but by a man of understanding and knowledge the state thereof shall be prolonged. So beginning with this word transgression, the definition: an act that goes against a law, rule, or code of conduct, an offense. But transgression, I think of that prefix trans, moving across something, moving across some border or some barrier. Now, the first part of this verse reminds me of my readings on the history of England currently. And I'm currently in the 13th century, in which there were many internal conflicts, the struggle between the noble class, the barons, and the royal institution, and the interwoven English church, the overarching papal see, and then the broader spirit of the time desiring a certain type of liberation. And you can see this genuine righteous spirit, and then also this more of a transgressive illegal spirit. And of a person that requests their liberties, it's kind of strange to imagine as an American that there may be the latter, that there may be this sort of sinful, inherently illegal or transgressional aspect to wanting a particular right. But of course we are all bound to something. We can't liberate ourselves completely from everything. Otherwise, our identity would cease to exist. We are contextual beings, and we require relationships. Even for those that live in the woods, they can do so, I think, in part by that which is passed down to them. Of course, they must be raised, first and foremost, by parents. Many people in the contemporary age, if they choose to live that type of life, they require resources from the community, at least to start, before they live off-grid. And I mention this because I'm thinking about liberation from society, liberation from bills, whatever. Liberation from taxes, from tyranny. There's so many things throughout history, and throughout English history specifically, that we can put into this class of wanting to separate from, and of the desire to separate from the just and the transgressor, the transgression. And of course, just as much as this applies to a prince and the lofty responsibility that rests within that station, this also applies to the individual. For the next half of the verse, instead of mentioning land, it says state, which is more broad. It implies many things, not just land. And so I view this sort of in an ontological sense. We could just as easily say for the transgression of being, many are the individuals thereof. Transgression of orientation. As I spoke of, every individual has some orientation. We are oriented to many things. Some things influence us more than others. Some things that we are oriented to, we share with others. Many things, surely. And within this network, this web of interconnectivity, I think an image begins to form. What exactly this image is can be difficult at first glance to understand. But there's a certain humility, I think, that comes from that recognition. That recognition that man is not although he is an agent, he is not alone. He's not alone in the world, he's not alone in his environment, he is dependent upon his environment, dependent upon others to a certain degree. He has needs, desires, wants. And there are things that he subjects to his desires, and there are things that his desires are subject to. The ordering of these things, I think, ultimately describes who he is, what makes up his being, his orientation to the network. Now, of course, in this line of practice, we are after towards that unifying thing. Many roads surely to reach that divine peak. But nonetheless, there are plenty of places for us to transgress, to lose something that we wish we hadn't lost, or to gain something that has become now a burden to us, an unreasonable burden. Some of which we are in control of, some of which we are not. All of which, again, retain this degree of dependence, but also of independence. For there are many things that could be said are identities, whether they be objects or of the living sort, of the conscious sort. But by a man of understanding and knowledge the state thereof shall be prolonged. The question of what that state is, as I mentioned before, it's probably quite broad. It can apply to many things, but what can we say of it? Is it just the state of understanding and knowing? possibly. What exactly does it mean to come to know something? What is the difference between understanding and knowing? Understanding I have thought of in the past as a grasping. It is the holding on to something. And here I think about a memory, but that doesn't fulfill the entirety of understanding. Grasping, let's say, in a physical analogy, I'm holding a pen in my hand now. In the case where I'm not holding it, I could say that I'm not grasping it. What do I gain, what do I lose from not grasping it? Well, I don't gain the pen, surely. I lose the ability to use it as a tool. I lose the ability to know what to do with it, for I must manipulate it to find its purpose. So understanding seems like a bit of an orientation of attention, like with many things. The word comprehend comes to mind. And a definition here is to grasp mentally, to understand. That doesn't help us very much. But some related words are to take in, or to see, to follow. And I like these related words, to see and to follow, almost as if there is something set there already that we are watching, observing, again following. And coming to know something, I think, is ordering what we observe, what we see. And I think this can occur at different levels. Understanding that I can pick up the pen is different from understanding how to use it. There are certain things I must know, perhaps, as a prerequisite. Knowledge is fundamental. There are principles of awareness, things that are established. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The understanding, the recognition that there are consequences to actions, there is order in the world, order among the chaos. There, of course, is this implication that the transgression, the breach of that boundary, would shorten the life of any particular state. In the case of the prince and his ownership of lands, it may lead him to war. It may lead to subversion, conflict in general. In our cases, transgression may lead to confusion, or again conflict of many different sorts. And I think about of course where I spend most of my time, which is at work. I think about the practices that I'm involved in. I think about exercise as a discipline. I think about what it means necessarily to know and to understand, especially with the pursuit of exercise, because it seems that it can be so different one day to another. that one must have this knowing, I suppose, that what they are doing will teach them something. It'll have them participate in a way with it that will lead to understanding. But beginning a workout is always difficult. To get warmed up, it's difficult to understand. The faith needs to come before. And in the middle or at the end, there is this understanding that forms over time. It's a practice that reintroduces the concept, I think, over and over and over again. A poor man that oppresses the poor is like a sweeping rain which leaves no food. So there's always a risk of putting what I'll say at the outset here as too much into the verse. There's an expression of churching something up. But by the same, or maybe not the same token, by the flip side of that token, I don't think that any verse should be taken lightly. And I think it is the case that even among quite simple lines of literature, we can make rather complex and I don't want to say the word profound, but meaningful expansions upon them. And I don't mean to say that this is a simple piece of literature, but just to say that if there was such a simple piece of literature, I could take any number of the words, I can go into them at a particular level of depth, I can share my experience over them and come to something that's meaningful, perhaps somewhat interesting. And this comes to mind because the poor man is somebody I think that commonly will be interpreted as someone that is lacking of money or of material prosperity. And there have been plenty of verses where I've taken the approach and I've said that the person that is poor of material prosperity is just touching the surface of what a poor man actually is. In fact, there's a much broader description, characterization of the poor man. And that poverty can extend to things that are much more than just wealth. They can extend to relationships. It can extend to mind, to desire, to will. And there are some verses I think push us more in the material direction than others, to prompt us to think about a person that is like a beggar on the street, that has very minimal means. But here I consider the interpretation that I'm used to, the broader, expansive definition of the poor man. So while indeed the definition of poor means lacking sufficient money to live at a standard considered comfortable or normal in society, of a place that is inhabited by people without sufficient money. This is Google definition or definitions. Worse than is usual, expected, or desirable, of a low or inferior standard or quality. Now, this is something that is more approaching the definition that I usually use. It's a bit broader, it doesn't necessarily refer explicitly to money, although it's included in it. A subset of that second definition, deficient or lacking in. Now, the third, of a person considered to be deserving of pity or sympathy. Now, again, this third definition is something that is more approaching what I would like to use. It can be assumed because of a lack of money, but also for many reasons. So let's think globally of this poor man, including some of the words or terms that were desirable from our searching of Google. Substandard, deficient, deserving of pity or shame. So of the first, this substandard. The standard, I think, is something that is an interesting topic of discussion. And exactly what constitutes this standard. In man's society, surely, there are plenty of things that feed into his idea of what some acceptable standard is. Now, to be impoverished, of course, meaning to be below standard, to be substandard, we can use a number of examples. If we think monetarily or materially, we may say that a person that is substandard in this regard lacks the sufficient resources to maintain themselves or to afford housing. There are a few different ways in which, few different levels in which this can be interpreted. And of course, people of a higher socioeconomic class will probably have a higher standard, or the threshold that a certain person in their minds, a certain person that would meet the qualifications for impoverishment, would necessarily be of a person that is of higher wealth, maybe, than somebody who is working class. Not in all situations, of course, but I think it's reasonable to expect that this might be a possibility because of their opulence, the way that they live, the way that they are used to living. There are other ways in which we can objectify the standard. We can remove our experience, at least to a degree, and say that, well, regardless of how much I own, and regardless of the person that is immediately below me in this socioeconomic ladder, I recognize that there's a certain rung in that ladder that regardless of where we fall, will likely occupy that place of poverty or of being a poor person. Housing is a good marker, I think, for that, in terms of that material impoverishment. But the standard is large. The standard is more than just that material. And if we extend this out, maybe we go to the heart of it, and we say that there's an impoverishment of heart, let's say. A difficult thing, surely, because this goes to the root of a human being, one of the fundamental roots of his ontology. To be impoverished here is to have a poor production capacity for emotion. And also, I think, for appropriate emotion. Here, much like the person that is materially impoverished, the person that is of poverty of heart is unable to house their selves, maybe. I want to say the soul, but that is a little bit much. I think it bleeds into the process of realizing the soul and its communication to everything outside of itself, communication to the divine, communication to God. Now, what do I mean by all of that? This is a subject I've gone over and over and over and over again in the Proverbs, that of the heart, that of its various conceptualizations. In fact, was it last chapter? 2 chapters ago. At the end of that chapter, I spent some time going over the heart as it relates to the 7 days of creation. And what a massive outpouring of information that was. An interesting experience, mind-altering experience, but given that it was one and done, so to speak, there is this desire to return to it, to solidify it in greater detail, but nonetheless, the heart as a symbol throughout my commentary on these Proverbs has grown, has shifted. And I continue to use all of the symbols, considering the 7 days of creation, considering broadly within that domain the coming to be of information, the coming to be of meaningful information, the organization of it, the dispersal of it, the way in which it weaves into multiplicity and into unity, of course from its central point, that of creation. And given these strange undulating periods that we call days, that are bound by these processes that are the evening and the morning, the concepts of light and of dark, of meaningful and non-meaningful or non-purposeful, of ideas of change, of identity formation. All of this, I think, is wound up within the organization and the structure that is the heart itself being somewhat of a reference to that physiological organ, but ultimately to the various processes of the mind that are involved with the seat of our desires, our feelings. To be impoverished here, to be substandard, I wouldn't even know where to begin. And such an exploration, I think, is too much for this verse. But in a broad sense, I think we can understand that there is a standard there somewhere. but because we find ourselves in a particular way, a particular post-Christian or post-Christ circumstance, even we could say post-Christian society, profoundly secular society, but all the same deeply rooted in what we have learned throughout the ages, the software that has been installed on each one of our minds since birth. We have a certain idea, much like a person of a certain high socioeconomic class. I think of a Saudi prince or a billionaire, an oligarch of any country, however learned they may be, their ability to understand is surely limited. That level, especially if it's diffuse, if they haven't come from something that is minimal. And of myself, I don't come from minimal means. Not necessarily rich, but not necessarily poor. Even in the way that I conceptualize it now, I have a standard that might deviate from another. And so I say all of this, I'm sort of getting away from what I was talking about with the heart. I say all of this to say that the standard of the heart, to be impoverished and to consider what it means to be impoverished beneath the level of the heart, I think what we can say in the broad sense without getting too far into the weeds that would last hours and hours and hours, what we can say is that the heart plays a fundamental role in our ontology, in our being, in our interface with reality. And to be somehow deficient in the way that, as I see in front of me, I have a water bottle. We can imagine that there's a hole somewhere in the water bottle. It could be of varying sizes. Let's say, it doesn't really matter, it's a small hole. Eventually, whatever liquid is in that bottle will drain out because of the hole in the bottle. There would be some breach in its purpose. It's no longer to satisfy its purpose because of the hole that is within it. And its poverty comes from its lack of fulfilling that which it is meant for. And at this level, at the ontological level, at the level of the poverty of heart, man, I think, ceases to be able to fill himself with the type of purpose that he is meant for. Now that's really vague. The type of purpose that he is meant for, the way of being that is possible for some agent of his constitution. And I think of severe developmental or severe cognitive defects that would apply here, in which people may be born and interface with the world in such a way that their agentic qualities are quite foreign to us, are quite minimal, and perhaps they don't surpass the abilities of certain animals. Perhaps in the very extreme circumstances, people that occupy a state of consciousness that is what we would call vegetative. That's the consciousness of a vegetable. Well, there is life there. There is activity. It is not the human activity that we associate with that being and that purpose. The vessel that holds the human spirit. But I think the same can be said of those that practice extreme evil. They are deficient in a similar manner. We could say the same of reason. The impoverishment or the substandard of reason, being deficient in reason such that one deserves pity or shame. And I can continue seemingly forever in this vein of identifying different aspects of man's condition and then going through all the ways in which that condition can be substandard compared to whatever the standard is. So where to go from here? Is it enough to understand in this verse that a man may be poor of many things? And I think the answer to that is it's not enough. This experience and this journey involves the individual, every single one of us that reads this verse. A poor man that oppresses the poor is like a sweeping rain which leaves no food. Every one of us must come to this with our own prayer, so to speak. And I start by saying, I am the poor man. There are plenty of ways in which I fail to live up to the standard. But there is always somebody above me. There's always another rung in that ladder that I can climb, another height that I can reach. And there certainly have been situations where I have behaved in an oppressive manner. And so let's talk about oppression, what it means, what the root is. So from Latin origins, we have the word oppressio, meaning a pressing down or a burden. The prefix ob, meaning against or towards, and the suffix of the word primere, meaning to press or to squeeze. Such an interesting beginning to the word, to press against. To press towards, to press down, burden. Or to weigh down, that's another way to think about it. As the word passed into Old French, we have the meaning of unjust, forceful domination, hardship, cruelty. In Middle English in the 12th through 15th centuries, the exercise of authority or power in a burdensome, cruel, or unjust manner, the suffering or hardship resulting from such domination. In contemporary usage, the unjust or cruel exercise of power over a group or an individual, a sense of being overwhelmed or weighed down, often by external forces or circumstances. So my apologies, but today is a new day. It happens to be a Friday evening, and it also happens that I am in a particular mood. Now, what this mood is, it's kind of difficult to describe. It's short of melancholy. It's emotional. It is wanting, but also shy. It's shy at what's possible or what's potentially to come. There's an aspect that wishes among this shyness to stop the trajectory so that experience, that uncomfortable experience, may not occur. It's such a strange feeling to have it when really no situation of the kind is on the horizon. But then again, in my imaginings, I think about an interpretation. I think about a place of mind. I think about a state of physical activity. A certain type of intensity of focus that affords us so much, but certainly we must sacrifice for. And I think it's within the sacrifice that causes us significant discomfort. In my mind, so desirous for that passivity of experience after a long week, wishes for itself just to be absent from it, not have the experience of life be a burden. In a sense, though, the ironic thing about it is that in the long term, it is a burden. The decision for passivity becomes a burden. Passivity itself becomes a burden. And although it takes effort and it takes discipline to orient the attention, it is a necessary condition for progress, for man to find a point and to go after it. That necessary aspect of life, that of sacrifice, it can be viewed from different perspectives. It can be viewed as suffering. It can be viewed as something that gives life, that gives drive, purpose, meaning. It can be both, perhaps because it is both. We can wish that we are not bound by certain emotional constraints or emotional affordances, physical constraints, affordances. If I take my pen and I run it through my arm, surely I'm going to feel it. There's no amount of making a poetry of the experience of suffering that will take the pain away. The pain will be there. And in fact, it's a little bit more poetic, I think, to feel the pain and to know from a subjective first-hand standpoint what feeling is, rather than just to be this observer trying to convince himself, or I should say, be this person that tries to convince himself that he's just an observer, that he can meet all of his goals without actually being present in the game, so to speak. It's an unfortunate trap. And it's a trap that I feel I'm at the edge of. It's an enticing trap. That all I have to do is put my foot forward, the pain goes away, but I sacrificed my soul. Perhaps not all sacrifices are painful. Maybe only the good ones. Maybe the ones that teach us something, or have the ability to teach us something. Or maybe it's just those that excite us, and it could be any number of things. Whatever the case, within this experience of suffering, of sacrifice, oppression, I think, will find us. Imagine burdens. What is a burden other than some oppression, some force that is pressing down upon us? And as a matter of justice, we don't know what that is when we feel it. Perhaps I'm wrong about that, but what I mean by that is when I consider the definition, one of the definitions that I had read for the contemporary meaning of oppression, it reads, the unjust or cruel exercise of power over a group or individual. Unjust. This is much like my discussion that I'm having now about the Magna Carta, between the relationship of various institutions to the society or the identity itself, what it means to liberate. What does it mean in this case to be just and unjust? Always an exercise, always an experience to come to some conclusion of what an oppressive force is to be considered unjust, or some burdensome force is meant to be just, like the burden of the state and the value that it extracts from the people that give to it, that give it identity. They get from it its binding power, the ability to enforce the laws, a system of laws. Some, they wish more autonomy on the part of this apparatus than others. And yet within ourselves, this aspect of just, of relationship, it is the same. How we choose to orient our identity, what we choose to give. Strange thing to say from a subjective standpoint, what we choose to give, as I'm thinking about myself as a collective, which I may be, but of course the self is a unified being. This force that is bearing down on us as we sacrifice, as we go through the pain, do we say that it is an oppression? Probably not. At least in some circumstances. In those circumstances in which the person that is dealing with suffering is suffering righteously, then it will not be considered oppression. It will not be a cruel or unjust pressure on them. And this may be something that is known or unknown. But all the same, I think the important bit about this is the feeling of the pain, it's more easy to endure if one knows that what one is doing is right. How to come to such conclusions, I can't say is easy. But the fact of the matter is, pain exists on both sides. Somebody can have pain for their sacrifice, for their suffering, and yet they can find themselves under an oppression, because what they are giving in return for their belief that the pain that they experience of life is to be mitigated, is to be abridged. In fact, they take on a new master to inflict them wounds so they don't have to inflict it upon themselves, or to have the reality, the harsh facts of nature, perhaps of God's judgment, come down so harshly and so sensitively that the types of questions about the very will of life is too much to handle, in a way. How can such a gift of life, be too much to handle? Perhaps of its possibility for oppression. Perhaps as oppression finds the innocent. Perhaps as a man that ought to deserve pity, sympathy, or shame, that is deficient in some way, chooses to take upon this power, whereas in other areas of life he is considerably lacking. And by his lacking, he takes up that mantle of oppression. And he says, by my deficiencies, I will set a new standard for the world. I will keep everybody below this station, or this standard. Because I wish to be the thing, I wish to be the voice that is judge, jury, and executioner. I wish to be the supreme legislator. I decide the proper apportionments of the liberated mind to the state, of the relationship of institution between institution. I am the king, I am the emperor, and even of the case of minuscule experience in which perhaps a poor man may find himself in a position to oppress any living being that is down on its luck. We could think of a dog that is stranded, or a cat. We know the stories of these types of individuals that take it upon themselves to inflict incredible cruelty on something poor and defenseless. A poor man that oppresses the poor is like a sweeping rain which leaves no food. A sweeping rain. We all know the sweeping rains. We've been outside when they've come through our territory, We've been inside to be made aware of its presence by the exclamations of thunder. But in a more intimate sense, who cannot say that their minds have not been subject to an experience that is so necessary for the expansion of hope and for the continuation of their belief, their will, their desire to participate in life. The very thing that seems to provide the necessity, the purpose, through which their life through which God finds us, communicates with us, shows us what good that there is, and not to be dismayed by the multitude and by the possibility of that which can come to be, that is wicked or evil. That sweeping rain that we all depend on, imagine the situation in which what we depend on arrives, and then suddenly we find that it is actually not the thing that sustains, that there is nothing else on the horizon that will sustain, that it is just the growing of mind to its failure, the growing of mind to a poor man that oppresses the poor. It would effectively make that poor man the sovereign. That experience of the sweeping rain promised to bring life, and not bring it, but only death. Such a thing is not our Maker. Such a thing is not our Father. Such a thing that tends towards absence is evil, and we are not the product of evil. And this is a matter of faith. This is a matter of belief. A type of truth substantiated in experience, made practical by the truth of the matter, but all the while confused by man. They that forsake the law praise the wicked, but such as keep the law contend with them. So the first half of the verse. They that forsake the law praise the wicked. So we have to discuss what it means to forsake the law. And what can we say of this word forsake? To go against, to break. What are the roots of this word? How can we understand it, break it apart, understand it a little bit more intimately? From the Old English, we have forsaken, which is to renounce, to deny, to refuse, or to object. That prefix a, away, off, completely or utterly. Seken, a verb meaning to quarrel or to dispute, to contend. It's profound disagreeableness. completely rejecting or abandoning. From Proto-Germanic roots, means to refuse, to deny, or abandon. In Old High German, farshan, to deny or reject. From Old Norse, forsaka, to renounce or to reject. In Middle English, we have the word forsaken, retaining that meaning of abandoning, renouncing, giving up something or someone. In modern English, it carries the sense of a deliberate abandonment or renunciation, a conscious decision to leave or to reject something. Perhaps there is a sense of betrayal or a profound separation of a sacred relationship. And so it's within this context, I think, that we find what it means to break from law. It is to break from a sacred relationship. And I suppose that for law to be in that sacred relationship, it must also have its appropriate posturing. It must also be of appropriate context. Certainly there is a way in which man can relate to law and be completely oppressed or obliterated by it, that his expression in the way that he finds God, the way that he sees God, the way that God sees him, that relationship is modified, altered, corrupted. In this sort of situation, that would not be a sacred relationship to law. It would be a perverse one. But we're considering a sacred relationship to law, the necessary relationship that man must have, that must adhere to all sorts of things in life. There are plenty of limitations placed on his experience. The physical are almost the easiest to see. I would not survive the fall if I jumped out of my window. I'm constrained by that situation, by that known possibility, that known event, that I am a physical being and there are physical constraints. Just as much as the law can be corrupted, we can think about the individual that is corrupt himself, and that it is because of his unjust dealings that he breaks from the established law. And let's just say good law, so we don't have to get trapped in that rabbit hole again. God's law. Even if we don't know what that is, the concept suffices for now. Because without the concept of God's law, or the good law, then it's impossible to come to understand a relationship of law that is anything outside of power, deceit, corruption, and just varying forms of it. To forsake this law. So we have some understanding of its etymological history, but even among the words that it implies, that it is related to, it's hard to really understand that experience. If I had to ask myself, well, what have I forsaken? I suppose there are many things. A conscious decision to leave or reject them, reject it. When I think about rejecting or refusing, I think about pushing away, denying, something that I choose not to interact with, have it be a part of me, have it influence me. In this conscious decision not to be influenced by law, I suppose it doesn't really make any sense. We could say that on the part of a state, and that may find its way to us. We may be just in such claims, but, again, I'm not going down the rabbit hole of man's institutions, but if man found himself in a state of business, of natural business, surely that law that is beyond him would find him, beyond his institutions. However harsh it may seem, it would find him. But there's much more here that we have to understand. If they that forsake the law praise the wicked, how is this so? We could think of praise as a type of attentive approval in which the wicked person in this situation, when the eyes of the mind find that person, that experience, that general trajectory, there's agreement. The heart feels it to be good. Now I'm interested here in considering that broader image of the law. In my mind, I think about this cylindrical beam of light that's surrounding a pit of darkness. And off of this beam of light, there is this enormous potential to bring that darkness into itself, such that what exists is only that known thing, the light, the awareness, the experience of being. And I think about those possibilities for which the various juts of light that come off of this cylindrical mass find themselves too far off in obscurity and disconnect themselves from that central light. And it's not long after this happens that they begin to dim and fade away into that nothingness. And in this way I see that praise or approval of the wicked being. The wicked, to a degree, is self-sacrificing, but self-sacrificing in the negative sense. The self that I speak of is more of mind in general. Now, this step may be a bit extreme. It might be more of what I consider to be evil, but certainly that wicked path, the inflation of the self, and the denial of everything else for the sake of itself, I think leads, not willfully on the part of the wicked person, but I think it leads just by virtue of their participation in that, on that road of wickedness, that eventually they are participating in the sacrifice of themselves. The sacrifice is into darkness. It might seem as though that they illuminate the self in the process, but it's all they can see. And the farther they separate themselves from that which is outside of itself, the more it can only see of itself and those for whom the wicked being wishes to corrupt it and to pervert. So when we say to forsake, again going back to our etymological considerations, abandoning, renouncing, giving up, denying, rejecting, moving away from, to contend with or to quarrel with something. All of this is consistent with that individual beam of light that moves away from that more central core, finds itself in the selfish nightmare, only to die alone. Now, from the Old Norse, we have the word lag, meaning something laid down, or a fixed rule or ordinance. This word was adopted into Old English as lagu, which meant ordinance, law, or legal system. Proto-Germanic roots, blaga, meant something laid down or some layer, foundation for order. From Proto-Indo-European, we have lay, meaning to lie, to lay, or to place, referring to the concept of establishing something. Our modern English definition of the word law: a system of rules established by authority, custom, or agreement, a body of principles governing behavior in society, a study or practice of jurisprudence. Now, in the Hebrew context, the word for law is Torah. Now, in the Hebrew context, the word Torah has a broader definition, encompassing instruction, teaching, guidance. Now, the root of the word Torah is yara, the verb meaning to cast, to throw, or to shoot, or to direct, metaphorically, instruct, or to teach. So in an interesting way, unlike the Greek or Roman concept of law as something that is rigid or codified statutes, the word Torah emphasizes teachings as a way of life, merging of moral guidance and legal directives. So we can take this both ways. We can take it as law in the statute sense, in the sense that there are certain things that we all must give up or sacrifice to that law, otherwise we will be judged accordingly. Some of that is necessarily brought down to us through our organization, the way in which we choose to order ourselves. I think there's a natural law that comes up from that. The other, of course, is a type of physical law, which we've spoken of, sort of a harsher law. And then there's that law of potential, which would involve instruction, teaching, and the general experience of determining or coming to understand what is right and what is wrong. And as a matter of belief, to believe that what one does ought to be geared towards the good. Now, of course, the wicked person believes what they are doing is good, so it's a difficult thing to split apart. How can one person be wicked if they believe what they are doing is good? They are living towards something for a good purpose. They are striving towards good purposes. I think there are ways in which law, over many years, independent of our institutions, can find its way to us. But I think it's subtle, and if it's not attended to, it will be missed. If one is not concerned about the warning signs, one is not concerned about the consequences of the warning. But of course we all know this to some degree, whether it be from the numerous books that have led us up to the Proverbs, or just our experiences as we live life. Paying attention never seems to be straightforward. I suppose there are ways in which it is, but I, for whatever reason, I think about often my behavior. I think about the ways in which I keep to myself. Especially now as we're prompted to consider this wickedness. And also I think about this word subtle, both in terms of that righteous law, but also in terms of that participation in wickedness. The subtleness, I think, is what scares me. It scares me because I can fall into it without knowing it. Now I think there's a dark road there that one can go down in terms of self-judgment, and it can be quite harsh and counterproductive, but I do think that there is at least a productive space to question. I think there's a productive space there for myself to question my behavior. And specifically what I'm thinking about now is an event that I had earlier this evening with some friends, and this is nothing new. It's something that is fairly consistent within my own participation in life. I tend to be more of a reserved person. Now of course I communicate, and I put an effort forth to maintain my relationships, but I know that there are many times that I do not participate as I should. I do not communicate as I should. I keep too much to myself. And that undoubtedly has a particular type of effect. And I think within that expectation on my part that my friends will always understand that there's more beneath the surface, underneath the hood. But for now, your friend is going to be passive in this experience. He's not going to communicate much. And I think that there's some wickedness to this. Selfishness, and the sense of taking more than one gives. But I am thankful, with the understanding that I should probably change this. I am thankful that the experience that I had today was filled with that feeling, as though I were putting a body part on a hot iron, a bit painful, because there was something that was telling me, an awareness, we could say an awareness of law, perhaps, that was telling me that there's something not quite balanced about what is happening here. and that it ought to be changed. And I can't say that I was successful, but I am at the very least thankful. Thankful now that I am thinking about it, that I can confront it and I can deal with it. Thinking about law in terms of instruction, I think is useful here, because taking instruction is difficult. Listening to something or somebody else tell you what to do when you feel as though you know that which is best for yourself, what is right, can be difficult. It can be difficult to surrender the attachment to one's own belief. But we are funny creatures. I feel like I'm a funny creature. Some things that just seem so trivial in the broader scheme of things, of course. That when we are in a particular moment, just take 30 seconds of deliberate effort to take that deep breath and to pause and to think about why. Why do I feel this way? I think that would solve a lot of my issues. Not that I have many, but surely enough that I ought to be more deliberate, purposeful. And although 30 seconds is not a long time, I think at the moment it could feel like an eternity. Especially under the condition of a strong, focused desire to change or to do something different. They that forsake the law praise the wicked. So I'm hoping some of this has illuminated a light on the first part of this verse, given it context and a little bit more meaning. There are countless ways in which we can interface with this verse, from different experiences, perspectives, etc. They that forsake the law praise the wicked, but such as keep the law contend with them. So where do we begin? I have a few different emotions, but the question is, which road do they lead me down? You know, there's something quite strange about knowing what one should do and feeling what one should do. And I'm often puzzled by the capacity of mind to both be in a position to feel something rightly that seems to be contrary to their reason, and yet the feeling is the thing that is correct. And also, on the other hand, the possibility for which feeling, even if it's an intense feeling, may be incorrect. And it is our reason that is the path that we ought to go down. And I think usually there is a way to distinguish between the two. but the way in which it's distinguished, I think, is contextual. It depends on various factors. And when I think about something that a recent example, something that I know that I should be doing, and yet my feeling is to the contrary of it, sometimes the feeling is not just an immediate sense feeling. Sometimes it's an entire orientation. It's an orientation to the way in which one is relating to the world. That it just seems impossible to undergo something that one knows by reason that they must do. And when I think about this experience, I think about this law. I think about that thing that is either felt or known, that is the truth of the matter. It is the way of things. And it would seem on a personal level that when I am battling internally, when my reason is fighting my feelings, or my feelings are fighting my reason, whichever one happens to be correct, there's a part of me that knows the right answer. And the bizarre thing is that in my weaker moments, the figure that knows how to take a step back and to reflect and to accept what must be accepted, or sacrifice what must be sacrificed. This thing is passive. It chooses not to engage. There are other times, of course, where I don't know what the answer is. But of fundamental life choices, finding first principles, I think, is a knack of mind. It is something that comes naturally. That if something is wrong in life, if there's something that needs to be changed fundamentally within, if one desires change enough, they will take steps to change, even if they don't necessarily know how the whole process will play out. And this law, on the other side of which, if we fail, or if we break it, we know that we will be judged. It is that fear of judgment that spurs us to do the right thing. But such as keep the law contend with them. Again, personally, that contention, that battle set upon the stage of mind between feeling and reason. It doesn't always have to be this way, surely. It could be between one thought, one reasonable thought, and another reasonable thought. It could be between two feelings, I suppose. Conflicting feelings. Whatever the case is, there's a party that is likely on the side of that which is right, or on the side that is almost right. Maybe it needs to be explored a little bit more, but given its acceptance and honestly accepting it, that the pursuit of such a path would lead to the keeping of law. In this battle that rages within, the consequences seem to be so dramatic. It makes me wonder why I would deny a known truth of the matter at all. For is it really the case that pain in the moment is to be of greater value than being innocent, perhaps, in that court of law at some point in the future? I say almost always the answer is no, that it is not something that is worthwhile to abandon that which we know to be true for the sake of pain. For that pain, that consequential pain, is much worse than that initial sacrifice. And I find it interesting to think about this battle that rages on inside. That on one side there is the wicked, and on the other there's the keeper of law. And for my part, I think when this happens, when I feel as though I have failed, or the wicked has won that battle within me, it's often because the keeper of law is dissatisfied at his ability to keep it, although he may understand it. There's a certain sense of fullness and completeness that is within the mind of the keeper that ultimately leads to his ruin, because he knows that he is fallen, and that which he keeps, that law that which he keeps is poor relative to the standard that he knows to be there. And it's almost like the contention on the part of the keeper is lost by a self-inflicted wound more than it is a loss of the battle because of the wicked adversary. So I think I'm going to end this episode here. My goal with that interpretation of the last part of that verse was to outline the potential arena for which that can take place. And certainly I can find within myself that arena. So I will continue next time with verse 5, chapter 28 of the Proverbs.